Hey guys, what's up? My name is Brenton Extran, and today we're going to be talking about this camera, the C300 Mark III. Today we're going to be talking about the many reasons why I got this camera, and the pros, the cons, and kind of what I use it for. So this is a very expensive camera, and one of the cameras that I actually came from this camera was the Sony FS7. So I've been shooting with that camera for about 2 years now, and it was a great camera for what it was, and especially for when it came out. I think it came out about 2015, and it really revolutionized a lot of the slow motion capabilities and the dynamic range you could get from a modern sensor. And I think they advertised about 14 stops at the time. In reality, it was about 12, maybe 12 and a half stops, but it was still very good, especially for at the time. And that camera got me through a lot. It was cool. It was good for like short films, music videos. But this camera right here is on a whole other level. It is fantastic. I think one of the biggest drives for me when I use a camera is when I can look at the image and I can visualize it on a big screen, like a feature film kind of look. And that's really the image that this camera has. It's got quite a lot of dynamic range, and it really picks up quite a lot of color detail that I wasn't really seeing in a lot of other cameras like the FS7. It records in the Canon Cinema Gamut is what it's called. And they kind of pair that with the Canon Log 2 log curve, in addition to shooting RAW in some of the modes. And so what that allows me to do is really play with a lot of the color. So in the 24p mode on this camera, it's recording in 12-bit RAW, which is really cool. And it gives me a really nice, like, flexible, basically container to work in, to allow me to manipulate the colors, the color space, and really just push the colors around. It drops down to 10-bit RAW when I'm in 60p or 120p, but I haven't noticed too much of an image hit on it. The usability with this camera is like no other camera I've used really before. I have a nice SNF button right here. I can jump into slow and fast, and use this other button to pick my frame rates and just kind of move along with all my frame rates with this little dial here. And all of this still doesn't disable the autofocus of the camera, which is another really cool usability feature of it. So it's got full like dual pixel autofocus, and it'll face track up to 60p, I believe. But it'll still have the more contrast phase detect base autofocus in 120 frames a second. So if you're keeping your subject in the box, like maybe in like the left thirds, the right thirds, it'll still be able to keep them in focus, which is really useful. So it's really useful actually if you have it on a gimbal and you want to do slow motion while you're on a gimbal. So I don't actually need a focus puller or like a fizz unit when I have this camera on a gimbal, because it'll track a face for me, and that's typically what I want to focus on, which is really cool. Next thing I'm going to talk about with this camera is the control interface. Okay, so this is really cool. I've set up the hand grip right here, so I can use the function 1 button on the hand grip, and that helps me select stuff on the menu, which is super cool. So I can go overhead and I can select 180-degree shutter. So I can bump it up, bump it down if I want that, like Saving Private Ryan look. I can drop it to 90-degree shutter, and then I can go over here and change the ISO, and bump it over there. I can change the aperture. And then I can change my tint control, which is more useful in the XFAVC mode, and then my white balance as well, which is super nice. And it's interesting. One of the only auto features on this camera is actually your white balance. This camera, to my knowledge, doesn't actually have an auto ISO mode or an auto shutter mode, which is very different coming from primarily a Sony user. I remember sometimes I'll do shoots and I'll just flip it in, pretty much auto everything. I'll keep the shutter at like a 48th. But it is pretty common for a lot of Sony users that shoot like events and stuff. They'll keep that cinematic frame rate, but everything else will be auto. And you can't do that on this camera. So that's one really good thing to note, that this camera is designed for documentary, commercial, and film work. And it's pretty specific about the users that it wants. It doesn't want to decide what the exposure of the image should be for you. It wants you to decide. And so that's kind of one of the things I like about the camera, is that it has a very manual feel. It feels like kind of like a film camera. And that kind of translates a lot over to the image as well. It's not trying to give you the kind of crunchy DSLR look out of camera. Even the wide DR mode out of camera, it's still pretty flat actually, and it gives you a lot of dynamic range to work with, which is super cool. Primarily, I'm shooting in the C-Log 2 mode on this camera, which allows for a pretty good flexibility. I think it's about a 16 stop curve, and there's about 13 usable stops of dynamic range in it, which is more than enough for most of the stuff I do. The only way you can get just a little bit more, I've noticed, is to shoot in the RAW mode, which gives you quite a lot of detail in the shadows, kind of buried in some of the noise, but it looks really good. So I'm gonna throw up a bunch of B-roll on the screen for you and make a little montage for you so you can enjoy that, and I'll be right back. Hey guys, so next I'm going to talk about the media for this bad boy. Okay, so these are the new standard. These are the CF Express cards. They're very, very fast. If you get one that's working. My first card that I got was a Delkin, and it did not work originally, but they actually overnighted me a new one, which is really cool. Great customer service over there, and they sent me a brand new working card, and then I just packaged up the old card and sent it back to them, which is really cool. I then picked up an Angel Bird. These are the AV Pro series, so these have a really nice sustained minimum write speed of 1,000 megabytes a second, which is really important for this camera, because this camera will record about 270 to about 275 megabytes a second in the slow motion mode. That's in the SNF mode, which isn't actually advertised on B&H's website. The maximum bit rate you get on the camera is about 2.1 gigabits a second. You actually have to go into like the manual and stuff to see like what your bit rates are for SNF mode. So it's very high. So needing a really high burst of data is actually pretty hard to do for a lot of cheap cards, but these Angel Birds work really well. I haven't had any issues with these or the Delkin cards I've been using now. So this is the newer Delkin card, and I like both of these cards. Ideally, I think I would get two of the same kind of card, just in case I had any like strange issues. It would kind of be duplicated, but having two different kinds of cards also makes sense. Just in case one was defective, the other one might still work. So that's kind of my mentality behind that right now. The recording on this camera is really cool. So I can do redundant recording to two cards, and I can also do a proxy record to an SD card. I don't have an SD card here, but if I want to get a nice, I think it's about 35 megabits per second, and that actually scales up if you're shooting RAW. The proxy record will also go up in bitrate to about 120 megabits a second if you're in that 120 frame per second mode. So actually, I don't have any SD cards that are fast enough to really hit that mark. So I'll record 120 frames a second. The CF Express card will be fine, but the SD card will error, and it will keep recording, which is nice. But for me right now, just know that you'll need to get a nice UHS-2 card for this. Something in the V60 category should be enough. I don't have any of those at the moment, but that's kind of what you need for a good proxy recording, especially in the RAW mode. Typically, I'm actually shooting in the XF-AVC mode on this camera. For me, I went back and forth a lot on the C200. This is before the C70 was announced. And this new C300 Mark III, because I wanted RAW, but I knew I wasn't gonna need RAW for all my projects. And looking side by side with a lot of the video, the RAW that comes out of the C200 has white balance control, but it doesn't actually have as much dynamic range as the XF-AVC that comes out of this camera. And considering this has a lower bit rate, this is so much better of a workflow for me because I can get nice small files and still have generally better image quality than the RAW in the C200. So that's one of the reasons I really like this camera, especially for just run and gun, B-roll content. It's got a couple of good bitrate options. So the all-I codec is about 480 megabits a second, which I shoot for most of my stuff. But if I want to shoot like an event or something, or just get a lot of footage and I don't want to worry about card space, the IPB codec in here is really nice. It's about 160 megabits a second when you're in the 4K mode. And that'll actually scale and like double when you go to 60p, and then I think it'll double again when you go to 120 frames a second. So it's nice to be able to record 4K in a nice 10-bit container and not have to worry about filling up my cards too fast. When I'm in the all-I mode, I get about 160 minutes on one of these 512 gig cards. So in the IPB mode, I can actually get 425 minutes on a single card at 4K. And I'm shooting in the DCI mode right now, but it's the same bit rate for the UHD mode. But I just like to get a couple more pixels in the DCI mode. Okay, so let's go over some of the stuff I don't like about this camera. So one thing I don't like about this camera is actually how loud the fan is for most stuff. You can set it to auto and you can set the fan to be low, but in a lot of ways it shows up in a microphone, so you can hear it. There it is. It's pretty loud for a lot of stuff, and I'm used to basically no fan or no fan noise. So in that way, it feels just a little bit more like a Red Cinema camera, how they have very loud fans, and you can set those to kind of auto curve and turn off when you're recording, but eventually they have to kind of ramp back up. And so that makes me a little bit nervous sometimes. If I'm doing audio, if I'm having someone else do audio on set, I never want the camera to be louder than the subject. So that's one thing that I don't like about the camera. Other thing I don't like about the camera is there's no record button on the top handle here, and I've been really used to that on the FS7, and I don't know, I got really used to it. I liked it, just having it, doing a low shot, just clicking the record button there. It's really useful, and I think there are third-party accessories to actually do that on this. I think Wooden Camera might make one. And it has a little remote cable to go to here, so I might end up picking up one of those later. But out of the box, it does not have that top record mode. The other thing that can bug me about the camera sometimes is how many menus there are. I don't know how many times I've just needed to menu dig just to find like screen brightness, which is something I change quite a bit depending on if I'm inside or outside. It's got a fairly bright screen actually, which I really like. But I typically just have it in the normal brightness mode when I'm indoors, so I don't get like a false sense of exposure. But when I'm outside, I need to do +1 or +2 on the exposure, or sorry, the brightness of the monitor, and that's not very easy to find quickly. So I'm still working on my favorites menu, so I'll probably add that to my favorites menu after this. But out of the box, it can be a bit of a menu dig. I think probably the best camera interfaces I have used have actually been Blackmagic cameras, which I kind of harp on a lot because they don't have the best reliability rating for what I'm used to. But the menus in Blackmagic cameras are very touch interface oriented, which I really like. They're very much part of like the iPhone generation. You know, everything is capacitive. It's really easy and really quick to move around. The interface is quick. You know, it doesn't feel laggy. It doesn't feel like a lot of the old Red cameras are very laggy. So it's got a decent processor to do all this extra stuff. But I would say having a more cohesive like menu layout on what is really important would definitely benefit this camera a lot. So I think that's one thing that could scare a lot of people away from this camera, is a menu that isn't quite as user-friendly. I would love to see like a C70 menu coming to this camera, maybe just like a little button that flicks on like a touchscreen menu. This camera really would benefit from a C70 menu, which I think would be a super cool like firmware update in a later date if anyone from Canon ever sees this. So in all, this camera is not for everybody. I find myself not bringing this camera places, which kind of makes me sad. I want to bring this camera everywhere, but ultimately this camera is not the take anywhere camera. If I'm shooting a project or even like a bigger like vlog or something like that, and I have a cameraman or camerawoman, this camera makes a lot of sense. But if I'm just filming myself, vlogging on this camera is not fun. This camera is about 7 pounds now with the lens and everything. So this camera can inhibit a lot of my creative outlet. But yeah, this was my kind of quick walkthrough of the C300 Mark III and why I love it and why I bought it. Hope to see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the content, and I'll try to keep making it for you guys. See you in the next one. Bye.